Good morning, Development Economics students. Welcome to week 8 of this module. For this week, we will concentrate on social policy, specifically looking at education. A friendly reminder that you've got to submit your weekly reading assignment number 7. For those who are scheduled to present, please upload your presentation before the lecture slot on Thursday. Review your slides and remember to participate in the discussion forum on Thursday. After reviewing your slides and reading both prescribed readings, you should be able to critically discuss the resource shifts to education in South Africa and whether these resource shifts has improved inequality in educational outcomes and thus inequality in the labor market. Let's start off by asking ourselves, what is social policy? I'm sure many of you already have an idea about what it is, but just to be more specific, social policy primarily refers to any guideline, principles, legislation, or activity that affects the living conditions conducive to human welfare. It could also be defined as actions that affect the well-being of members of a society through shaping the distribution of and access to goods and resources in that society. So, when we consider social policy and education, it is very clear to see that education is an entity that affects the living conditions conducive to human welfare. And this is why many countries invest in education. So countries invest in education as well as healthcare because it's regarded as human capital. Specifically, education increases people's ability to add value or productivity to an economy. And you can read more about this theory if you refer to the work of Schultz. The failure to treat human resources explicitly as a form of capital, as a produced means of production, as the product of investment, has fostered the retention of the classical notion of labor as a capacity to do manual work, which requires little knowledge and skill, a capacity which, according to this notion, laborers are endowed about equally. However, this notion of labor was wrong in the classical period and it is still patently wrong now. Counting individuals who can and want to work and treating such a count as a measure of the quantity of an economic factor is no more meaningful than it would be to count the number of all manner of machines to determine their economic importance. In other words, the classical theory only considered labor in terms of quantity and failed to look at the quality of labor and also furthermore in terms of what investment in the quality of labor can bring about to the economy. And this is where education plays an important role. Our focus for this module looks specifically at the South African context. And so with education, we are also going to take a closer look at the South African context. Taylor, in 2010, proposed a hypothesis of how education plays out in the South African context. If you look at this chain of events here, let's start on top, looking at social economic status at birth. Taylor proposes that the socio-economic status that you are born into will also have an impact on your cognitive ability in early childhood through parental IQ, maternal health, nutrition, and early cognitive stimulation. Dependent on the investments made at this point, it will impact a child's educational performance in early school years. There are other factors that impact this as well, such as your average school socioeconomic status, the language of learning and teaching, teacher quality, peer effects, and subject choice. These then feed into educational achievement in Matric, which culminate in the ultimate educational attainment and quality. These are impacted by the cost of tertiary education, both explicit and implicit, parental and personal aspirations and perceptions, as well as society and culture. Dependent on the outcomes at this level, it then feeds into an individual's performance on the labor market. What type of tertiary education did the individual invest in, and what was the quality of it? The institutional field the field of study and the institution matters as well. Labor demand and supply are also important factors in determining the outcome, as well as individual motivation. And then the cycle continues with the next generation. So given the very strong links between education and income, as seen in the previous cycle, educational inequality is a fundamental determinant of income inequality. And you know from previous lectures that South Africa has the highest degree of income inequality in the world. There is a clear need to understand South Africa's educational inequality if we want to understand South African income inequality and make any changes in that regard. High inequality and unemployment can be considered two of the most severe problems facing South Africa. Educational quality is intimately intertwined with both of these. According to the Freedom Charter, education should be free, compulsory, universal, and equal for all children. Fisk and Lads also speak about the notions of equal treatment, equal educational opportunity, as well as educational adequacy. From our very earliest lectures, you will know that the main driver of total inequality is explained by wage inequality. In fact, it's about 78 to 85%. So the important question to then ask is, what determines wages? And education is one of the main drivers of wages, specifically the duration, the quality, and the type of education. IQ and motivation, social networks, as well as discrimination also determine wages. Please note that the last 3 points, IQ, motivation, social networks, and discrimination, can also impact education, which then in turn also impacts wages. So these 3 points can impact wages directly or indirectly through education as well. So let's consider higher education in the South African context. We look at a paper by Van Broekhuizen and Van der Berg of 2006, where they ask how many of those who start school reach Matric, how many then graduate with Matric, and then how many graduate with a degree. This 2016 study followed the entire Matric cohort of 2008 into university and tracked them from 2009 to 2014. After analyzing this graph, I'm sure many of you will feel extremely privileged to be in a position where you are accessing higher education. If you look at this cohort of those who started off with school, about 60% went on to write Matric. After that, about 37% passed Matric, 14% with a bachelor's pass, and 12% with a diploma pass. 12% were able to gain access to an institution of higher learning. 6% were able to get some kind of undergraduate university qualification within 6 years after Matric, and 4% got a degree within 6 years after Matric. So you guys fall within this 4% group if you were in the cohort of this study. So you can see you are in the minority and in a very privileged position in the South African context with regards to higher education. So who is accessing higher education? What do they look like? So let's consider this from a socioeconomic status perspective. If we divide the population of learners by income decile, 1 being the poorest income decile, 10 being the richest income decile, it is very clear to see that access to higher education is skewed towards the richest. So it's those students who are falling in the upper income socioeconomic status deciles that are being exempted, so they can actually enter into higher education institutions, and then once they are accepted, they then start to attend. And you can see that gradient, how it increases as income increases. So we've just looked at what higher education access looks like by socioeconomic status. Let's look at it by gender and race. So if we review this Matric cohort attaining undergraduate degrees in 2008, you can see that the highest proportion lies with white females who are clearly having a higher percentage of undergraduate degree attainment. It's then your Indian population. Again, females are higher than men. And if you look at all races, there are more females with undergraduate degrees than men. Even though in the labor market, when you do labor economics, you will see that this then flips over when it comes to salaries and positions. But in terms of attainment of degrees, females are outperforming their male counterparts. But you can still see that the racial divisions of apartheid persist, and your black race has the least or the lowest proportion of matrics attaining undergraduate degrees, followed by colored, and then your Indian and your white races have higher proportions. So what are the returns to education in the South African context? There's often a reported crisis in graduate unemployment, but this is actually a fallacy, and it's based on questionable research. Van Broekhuizen in 2016 found that not only is graduate unemployment low at less than 6%, but it also compares well with rates in developed countries. So in South Africa, it is still beneficial to have or to attain higher education. The large expansion of black graduate numbers has not significantly exacerbated unemployment among graduates. Black graduates are, however, still more likely to be unemployed than white graduates. For example, in 2015, black graduate unemployment was about 9% compared to 3% for whites. So yes, we still see a racial division when it comes to labor market outcomes, but the returns to higher education itself in South Africa is not as bad as many would believe, and is comparable to developed countries. Our 15 minutes are almost done, so I'll end here, and when we come back we will look at schooling in the South African context.